Well, my name is Jenny Melo, and my story is called When It's Over. And this microphone's kind of low. Okay. I don't know. Oh, okay, that's better. Okay. I woke in my bedroom in a state of panic, feeling like I'd been lying in a refrigerator. My legs were shaking, and my blood felt almost cold inside of me, but I was covered in a thin sheet of hot sweat. My lips were cracked and inflexible, my jaw tight. I could see morning was coming through my window, and was glad to know I'd made it out alive. I dreamed of the masked faces again. They were frightening at first, and they always were. But they never seemed to mean me any harm. In my dreams, they'd dance around, each vibrantly painted face bore a different expression. The one that glared at me just before I awoke had big, blue eyes, familiar and warm compared to the chill that racked my body. The eyes brought me back. They always did. I was completely naked in my twin-size bed, my hair stuck to my face in sweaty knots. I groaned as brief memories came back to me in sharp flashes. They brought me to tears. They streaked down my face as I cried in complete silence. I didn't want to remember. I wanted to lay in the wet sheets forever and watch the sun rise and fall until the end of my days. How could I have let it happen? I had watched it happen so many times and always swore I was in control. I looked around my room in a panic to find that I was completely alone. I hated being alone. I felt for my big cat Droopy, and not even she was to be found. What if I was still dying? I gave up the struggle and let myself remember. My voice rang in my mind, my pathetic pleas to survive the last night. Please, I sobbed to the blue eyes, don't let me die. The memories hit me like a nightmare, and I needed to get out. I needed to find him. You did too much. You did too much, baby. The blue eyes of my memory looked afraid. You need to calm down, and you need to keep your heart rate down. In my memories, I sobbed endlessly and shivered in a cold sweat. He held my shaking body in his arms and kissed my head as his own heart raced wildly, beating against my back. The last thing I remembered was feeling myself go. Just before everything went black, I remember thinking, where am I going? Will I be back? Will I be able to see the blue eyes again? Obviously, I hadn't gone anywhere because I was now lying in my bed. I'd gone to see the masks, and I usually came back from seeing the masks. The blue eyes brought me back. They always did. Fuck, I groaned as I tried to sit up. I looked down at my trembling legs and placed my hands over them to make it stop, and they wouldn't. I could hardly move them as I tried to swing them to the side of my bed. I placed my feet on the freezing tile and stood, only to collapse. I was so weak, my blood so cold. I tried to call out, but my voice was hoarse and burned out. I pulled myself up with what little strength I had and steadied myself while holding the bed. I held the walls as I got to my door and opened it to the rest of my house. It was a house I'd lived in since I was born. There was once a time it was filled with golden retriever hair and laughing children, running and playing with younger versions of my parents. It was now filled with deafening silence and ghosts from better days. The sun tore through silk curtains and made unseen dust particles come to life as they danced in the air. Something about the way they danced reminded me of myself. I was free and wild. I was notorious for it. I did what I wanted and came and went from everywhere as I pleased. I had no limits or boundaries. I could dance in the air if I wanted to. That was the attitude that got me here, rambling about my house naked with toxic blood in my body. Alex, I whispered, as if he could hear me. I staggered my way over to the kitchen and leaned against the sliding glass door in exhaustion. The blue eyes looked at me in surprise from the other side, and I suddenly didn't feel so bad anymore. He got to his feet. You shouldn't be up, he said, taking me in his arms. The warm air from the outside blanketed my bare skin. I felt safe in his embrace. Help me sit, I said as I staggered over to the other empty chair. He helped me into the chair, and I stared out into the greenery of my yard and finally felt at peace. He sat beside me and dragged on his cigarette nervously. I looked over at him and smiled. "Can I have a drag?" He passed me the cigarette, and I took a nice, long drag. I looked to the coffee table to see tons of small baggies and suddenly felt a familiar hunger return. Felt like death, but I knew exactly what would bring me back to life. "Pass me a baggie, babe," I said. He shook his head. "There's nothing left." I stared at him and laughed. "Seriously?" He nodded. He looked down at his wet shoe and chuckled. The blue eyes looked up at me then. Their gaze seemed to burn right through me. "It's over, Jenny." I dragged on the cigarette calmly. "No, it's not. I'm done. This was it for me. I cannot and will not watch you go through that shit again. It was a mistake. It's happened to you like 100 times. I watched you OD in my sleep, for God's sakes." Tears welled in his eyes, the blue eyes. "If it takes me having to stop to have you never go through that again, then I will." "You're forgetting who got me into this shit to begin with," I snapped. "I have not forgotten. I love you, but I'm killing you. You say I protect you, and I'm good to you, but I give you this garbage every day. This ends now. For me, anyway." I stared at him for what felt like an eternity. The cigarette went out between my fingertips, and the sun suddenly felt very hot on my skin. My head thundered with pain. This was real. As real as it could get. He had said, "I'm done," several times, but something about the way his hands shook and the tears streaming down his cheeks made me believe him this time. 1.5 years I had lived under the spell, and him even longer. It was no easy task to walk away from it all without some scars. He reached over for my hand. His fingers were calloused and warm in mine. We were in it together, partners in crime. We'd been side by side through it all. As much as the hunger screamed inside me, I knew it was wrong. I wasn't a dancing dust particle glittering through silk curtains. I was not immortal. The memories of the night before reminded me of that. "I'm with you," I said to the blue eyes. The blue eyes brought me back. They always did.